Okay, welcome to day 2 of the POA budget review from the Finance Advisory Committee and the POA Board. Today, the plan is to go over any modifications that were made to the numbers overnight, and Mickey will take us through that, and then also to field any questions or comments that anybody has after their review last evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mickey.
The edits that we had made yesterday through the conversations, there were a few things that didn't tie out, so we spent a little time making sure that that was corrected. And there were a few slides that we made some changes to, and we'll go through those in just a moment. There was a schedule where the fee structure on the golf was off, and we've corrected that. There was some numbers on the park memberships for the household members and the individuals that were used on averages, and so we got some better numbers for that. Probably the biggest changes were on the public works and the ACC. In one of the slides, we showed that there wasn't a change in the installation fee for the utility tanks. And walking into this, trying to capture all of the things that should be looked at, that was one that we really didn't give any consideration to. And there was about $10,500 that we were charging for each installation, and rather than carry that over at the same rate, we made a change to add $1,500 to that charge. So it goes along with the idea of trying to capture some additional revenue on new owners as they start developing and taking advantage of what you guys have built here. So that increase of $1,500 will show that as well. The other one was on the ACC on the permits. One of the permitting fees was based on 70 cents per square foot, and we increased that to $1 per square foot. So a couple of changes. Those together netted about $480,000. So if you compare yesterday's version to this, you'll see some increases on those two levels. So with that, we'll go through here, and again, we'll try to just mainly touch on what we're going to do. The last thing that was modified was on the capital reserves. Clayton had a change in the estimate of what he was going to do for the big sewer project, and so we increased that up to the $5.4 million that he had estimated based on yesterday's conversations. So nothing has changed on our strategic reserves. A little bit higher on the revenues now because of some of those changes that we had just talked about. Nothing changed on the lots or the debt. Nothing on our assumptions. Our head counts are still the same. And so this is the updated version of the consolidation. Okay, hopefully that's better. So in this, the only change that we've really seen is that in this, the revenue numbers, we picked up some additional revenue for the public works and the ACC. Previously, when we looked at this, the net reserve excess was a little bit lower. So when we apply these capital reserves, I think yesterday's version showed that we were in a deficit position for the 9.1% increase. Now with that 400 and something thousand, we're now showing a little bit of a positive. So we'd like to say that we're going to have more than that, and in the future I think we'll control the spending in such ways that we will have additional net surpluses. But in this tough year with a lot of anxieties over increases and some pretty major capital tenacity in that reserve, the utility sewer changes, we see that that turned around to a little bit of a positive change there.
Mickey.
Yep.
I know you get to it later, but did you correct the water and sewer cash flow page so we're now closer to break even versus a significant loss from yesterday? Are those numbers in here?
As we get through to the sewer and water, we'll touch on those.
Okay, and the other thing, just to highlight for the property owners based upon feedback yesterday, the difference between a 5% increase and a 9.1 generates a little over $500,000 in total revenue, and it takes your assessment rate up an additional $6.30 a month, going from 5 to 9.1.
So this is a summary of the funding, what each of the groups was providing from a subsidy or a deficit, what their capital spending was going to be, and so on the Public Works. We changed the total, but the only thing that changed was the 2024 spending, so it didn't really impact these two schedules. And so in our 9-year projection in this 2024, this additional spending that we see right in here was increased by about $2 million. If we go through the individual schedules, there aren't too many changes. The one note that we did capture yesterday was on slide 20. So Tenaci's numbers were replicated in this third column, and Kahidi was not present. So we've made that change. So in the deck that you got, the full deck, it still says, it may say Kahidi at the top, but the numbers are still Tenaci's. And so Brad pointed out that I made one additional change. So that separate paper that's floating around out there, that's the updated page for slide 20. And all of this will be available once we're completed and once the board votes on it and it's final. Then we'll have a firm version to be able to lock in as our final, and everybody can have a copy of that then. Nothing on the historical trends or the fee structures, membership structures. Nothing changed on the revenues. It was strictly informational on that one slide. Under Parks and Recreations, there was one change, and I don't even think it's in your deck or in the pages, but these household memberships are showing probably lower than what is on the screen. And Brad pointed out, we had used an average, and it didn't really make sense. It was dropping like 300 memberships going from September to October, which didn't make sense. And so Simon gave me the actuals for October and gave me the estimates for what he thought they would be for November and December for both household and the individual numbers. So didn't change things a whole lot, but from, if we're trying to build this and be as accurate as possible, I agree with Brad. We want to touch on everything, make sure it's as accurate. It didn't feed to any additional information on the financials. This was strictly our estimations. So no change in Parks and Rec, no changes in food. One change we did make on this slide 38 was we started breaking out some of the questions that we had on the number of boat slips, personal watercraft slips, and kayak slips. And so we went back to the team and identified that there are, in fact, 945. There are 3 that are not usable because of the depth. They don't allow for boat access, and so either we need to dredge them or do something to make them usable. And then we have 4 that we currently lease to T-BART, Watershed, and the Fire Department. And so since we're not gaining any revenue from that, that nets out to 938. That reduction, I think, was 942 yesterday, decreased our revenue by a couple of thousand, so kind of a minimal change. But this is obviously a better and more accurate way of reporting this detail. Nothing else has changed on docks. On the Public Works rates, this is where we were talking about earlier about this utility installation. Previously, we had this set so there was no increase. So we went in on the interceptor tank charge and increased it by $1,500. That number times these number of installations yielded that, I think it was $266,000 on this portion of the revenue. So these are the breakouts of.
Just a question, Mickey. So this will ultimately kick in at what point in time? So anybody that's permitted today has the existing rate structure. Anybody permitted in the future would have the new one. Is that, or
that's
the way to think about how this was modeled through?
And we tried to build that into the numbers that the calculations got a little wonky, but I think
Okay.
we allowed for some of that.
Okay,
So,
because you won't get full impact
correct.
in '23. It'll be really be later '23 and then on into '24 when we'll
Correct.
see all that, correct?
We've got 174, and I think I forgot to make this change. This number is probably not right. But 174, if you're clearing 17 at a time, it's going to take a little bit to clear out this 174. There's 10 months. So that leaves 2 months of current sale, and then a few periods of some of these newer ones. So you're not going to get a whole lot of an impact from some of that, but we did get some pickup.
But going into '24, it would be full.
2024 will definitely feel the impact from that.
So, Mickey, I have a question. On that bottom section there where it says revenue per tank installation, I see the numbers are the same every year, so, or every month. Can you kind of explain how those numbers are derived?
Well, these are the fees that are charged, these amounts here, are per installation. And so when we talked with Public Works and how they're going to manage these, there's not really a set number that they would hit. They looked at from an annual perspective and said, how many can we do? And that's probably 17 a month. So those fees times the 17 should be, if I've done the math right, should be these revenue numbers.
So so in that case, if we take the 204,000 divided by 17, that would be the charge per, cost per?
Let's see.
I just want to understand, make sure I understand the
And
numbers.
that's at 12,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
So, to Steve's question about, go ahead.
I think we got to work on this some more, though, because the 12 won't kick in January 1, correct?
Yeah, got too much revenue in there.
Okay, we'll look at that one more time.
Yeah, that's where I was asking that phasing question, because I think it's only going
Yeah.
to really kick in the back end. And Jessica was nodding her head, so the modeling on this by month has a different assumption set than what this supplemental sheet had here? Is that a way to think of it? You guys put it in?
Yeah.
So your numbers on page 44, or no, or is there another sheet in there?
So this number right here, we'll go back and look to see when those numbers fade in.
Yeah, because it should only be like a November, December assumption if it's consistent with what Jessica's got in the overall model, correct?
Yeah, so how many tanks, how many have you already locked the price? Because right now you're saying you're going to do 238, right?
So there's, going into 23, there's 174, so I'm assuming all of those would have
Yeah.
been locked into their existing
You
rates.
got to build those out first before you.
Exactly.
And then on the new.
Yeah, it's 174 from 238.
Yeah, we'll look at
about
the
64.
modeling of that. That may impact and reduce this by a little bit.
Okay.
But the 12,000 will kick in January 1 when we permit. Because this fee is collected at permitting before we're permit. So that will start collecting January 1.
But there is 174 that have been permitted that have not been installed yet.
Correct.
That
But
backlog's got to burn off before we start the new ones.
Yeah, those are already been paid for.
Well-
But out of this 17, some of those will be the new $12,000 one. I mean, just because we permit in January, they may finalize in April or May with some of these houses that are being built, so.
So as this revenue is received, and because the work is not done, it's placed into a deferred revenue account on the balance sheet. And though, as these work orders are being completed, then we relieve that revenue. So right now, while we receive them, they were paid at the lower rate.
Right.
And so they will be relieved and offset at that lower rate.
Yeah.
Correct.
But it'll
But
take the
starting
middle of the
January
year
1,
before
it'll
we
be-
start
It'll be a
getting
work
that.
through. till that
Correct.
Clears, that's.
Correct. So we'll make
So
that
this
change
needs
to
to
this
get
assumption.
retweaked
Correct.
there.
So, Mickey, one more question on this. So, the installed line is 17 per month. 17 times 12 would be 204
Yeah.
instead of 238.
You
I don't know
pointed
if
that out. I didn't get that
I don't
yesterday.
know if that has an impact on any of your numbers and subsequent.
That's just a formula error.
All right.
So with those changes to the utilities, and obviously the revenue here on the new utilities, we'll have to go back and look at. This is where we end up with this net surplus or subsidy in the course of the period. There's capital and maintenance that's offset to that, which will net down to this below section here. So this is what you were talking about, Steve.
Yeah, so this basically says you're drawing down reserves, whatever the beginning balance is going to be.
Correct. From a public works perspective, we are utilizing reserve funding for that. It is not standalone at this point in time.
Right, so before next Wednesday, what we ought to have is a roll forward of your water sewer reserves, because if your 10-year plan shows every year you're in a subsidy, drawing down your reserves, you could be in violation of the license, which requires us to have reserves for water and sewer. So it's critical we have that water and sewer reserve broken out to see what this does. What it may say is you need to maybe raise rates higher,
Okay.
because you cannot continue to draw from the reserves in water and sewer, because you will be in violation.
Okay. We'll make some additions to that reporting. Buried within the admin section on some of these fees is that permitting fee that we've changed from 70 cents per square foot to $1 per square foot. And I'm not sure why ACC necessarily rolls up under the admin umbrella. I think that perhaps we should, in the future, look at it separately, because it's not really an admin function. It's a permitting, and they have lots of staff involved with that. So we'll look at trying to do some separate reporting for that for next year.
You have a breakout of ACC though as a department.
We do have it by department.
You do have all that separated in the underlying financial.
Correct. It just gets
Yeah.
blurred, I think, within the
You put it
admin
in, I
group.
agree.
So we'll look at that for future. Nothing changed other than the revenue, nothing on safety or commercial. Any comments about those changes that we made?
Mickey, there's a question online about reserves. It says, if they are being taken, talking about reserve, are there ways to restrict the use of accumulated reserve funds so that it's not misused in the future by maybe less disciplined boards?
I guess I'll take that one. The reason we have reserves is the operating arm of the POA cannot touch the cash in those reserves without board approval. So the only time a dime can be spent out of those reserves, it must come, whether it's for maintenance or capital, must come to the board for approval. So you need 4 out of 7 votes to approve money coming out of those reserves.
Guess this is on. This is an area when, I know yesterday, Steve called it ready for service. The reason that we're potentially going to 9.1 versus 5. And looking at the numbers, it's about a $500,000 difference. This is the one area I think, and I don't know where Kevin is on his legal review or whatever as to what our potential is to have a greater impact fee or something. Just looking at these numbers, you're taking the water installation up by a nominal amount. This is one area I think that we control, and perhaps that should go to a greater increase. Or we need to see if Kevin can come forward with some other way that new potential residents can pay a higher fee, and we're not putting all those costs onto the residents that have been paying over all the years, and now we're facing a potential 9.1 for 23, and that will carry forward. You will be paying that for into the future. So if the sooner we can get some of that potential impact on the budget in later years, I think that would be helpful for the board for their decision process coming up in a week. Thank you.
As I mentioned yesterday, Kevin and I are in the process of working through several areas of new revenue, and whether that is on sales or in other areas within the community, that's a goal that I have for 2023 is finding every way possible to increase revenues without going directly to the homeowners for that money. And because ultimately, as I said yesterday, that whole revenue stream of new homes is going to die. And we have to plan for that future now, because if we don't, when we get there, we'll all be sucking air. And so we've got to be able to plan for the future in that regard.
I appreciate that comment. I think it's well said. My concern, years ago when we first came here, we were basically told the monthly fees would be 5%, which was fine. One thing that drove us coming here, we lived in a community in Savannah where they started assessing yearly for certain fee requirements. And I almost consider that like a cancer in the community. Once the assessment started, one assessment became 2, became 3. And I'm concerned that this differential between 5 and 9.1, I consider it almost an assessment. Once that starts, it's like a cancer. It just keeps going. And to your point, if there's a way to figure out a revenue stream to reduce that back from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, that certainly would be beneficial to the community. My fear is 9.1 in 3 years is going to become 10.5, then 12, then 15. That's what happens. It just it gets out of control. So anything you can do to obviously crunch numbers to reduce that over time, I think would be very beneficial and appreciated by the community. Because once it gets out of control, you lose it. And that's a real concern, I think, going forward. We left this community in Savannah where we started getting assessed because it got out of control. And I'm fearful that the same will happen here. If it gets out of control, people may decide to leave the community, which would, of course, be devastating for all of us. Thank you.
Marty, let me handle this one. Under Article 10, Section 3 of the Covenants and Restrictions, it says that the annual assessment is maximized at either 5% or up to whatever the inflation is as of June 30th. In the last year, that would have been 9.1%. Now, there's also a provision for special assessments. We have never done a special assessment. That would require, some pretty significant stuff. But this basically says that the 9.1 that's in the budget schedules, that's actually, an annual assessment. It's not a special assessment. So we shouldn't confuse the two. I would tell you there'd be great debate on the board if there is ever proposed a special assessment.
I have a question popped into my head. You said that once a building stops, the revenue stream dries up. I don't understand that. Don't we still pay our fee every month, every house that's built here? What do you mean it dries up?
So I'm sorry, I apologize for not being entirely clear. Currently, we have a revenue stream that comes in every time somebody builds a new home. There are fees that are paid at the purchase of that home and in the building of that home. There will come a time when that particular revenue stream will no longer be available because there's no place else to build.
Is that a big revenue?
Yeah, it's a pretty good chunk of change right now.
Mickey, why don't you put that slide up?
Okay. And then about the cost of living going up. Okay, that's what you're using this time around, the 9.2%, whatever. All right, you can use that. What happens when next year we go into a recession and it goes down, we are like a negative 2% or whatever, what do you do then?
Well, remember that the 5% is a maximum unless inflation exceeds the 5%. There have been times in the past where the board has not given an increase of the maximum 5%. So that would all come into consideration in a particular budget year.
So what you're saying is if the cost of living, if it drops, if it goes into negative, then you go back to 5%?
Well,
depends
yeah,
what the
you'd
numbers
have
would
to.
be.
most.
You'd have, that's the most you could do.
Yeah.
You could do less.
Could do less, like the good old days, okay. Yeah, I understand
It-
everything, you know, inflation.
I wouldn't hold out a lot of hope for
And
that.
everything gets more expensive, but, you know, as the homeowners, they look at it of increasing fees. And it's certainly worth a certain amount to be able to live in Tellico Village.
Right.
But there comes a point where people are gonna start saying, hey, wait a minute, this is getting like crazy. And then they'll just sell their house and move someplace else, I guess. I mean, that's the alternative.
Well,
but
you know,
it has to be a balance.
If you look at other communities like us, actually, our assessment levels are very low
Right,
comparatively.
No, I understand that, yeah.
You know, and you probably did that same homework when you bought here. I know I did. And it's almost shocking how much lower we are than everybody else.
Right. Well, we don't need to be like everybody else.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we do have to be.
I
But
think,
if you want all the stuff that we keep getting told that people in the village want, it costs money.
That brings up another question. I think, on the, you know, the village next door, might have been a board member, might have been somebody else that said, oh, well, we need to increase the assessments because we love our golf and, you know, we need to have those amenities available. And then I asked that person, well, wait a minute, how many people that live here actually play golf? I mean, a lot do, but a lot don't. You know, a lot of us are into boating or, you know, other items. I don't play golf. I should, but I don't. But, you know, they're using that as a reason that's why we should
Well,
increase.
I understand that, but we have 3 championship golf courses that, by the way, support all of our property values.
Right, right.
So, you know, there's a very positive benefit to having golf and having it in a first-class condition.
Right, are we on the positive now? I mean, people can come from outside and play the golf courses, right?
Yeah, but they pay more.
Exactly, so is it a self-sustaining?
No, it is not. And frankly, if you want my prediction, it never will be.
Oh, okay.
Just like, and rec's the same way.
Well, how about raising the golf fees for the people who live here then, the people that really want to play golf?
go up.
Pardon?
Then your subsidies would go up because you have the law of elasticity of demand and competing prices on other golf courses.
Yeah, we try to price to market, you know, and in fact, a little below market for the people that live here because your assessments are supporting those courses.
Okay, to answer your first question, though, on the revenues going away, if you take a look at the ACC fees, and specifically transfer fees for property, permit revenue, and your CAF fees, and take a look where we're going in 2022 forecast. 2022 looks like that number's about $738,000 of revenue, which goes straight to the bottom line, straight into reserves.
Okay.
The 23 forecast is 529. So you're losing a couple of $100,000 on ACC fees because we're getting close to build-out. So as your number of lots for build-out where you pay for fees goes down, that what I'll call gravy revenue that goes straight reserves is being dried up. That's why Chet and the board are looking at other ways to raise revenues to supplement, to replace that lost revenue. So when Chet made the comment, revenues are going to go down, he was referring to this.
What do we use the reserves for? I mean, when are they?
You'll
actually
see that,
used?
and we pay that for maintenance and capital, and you'll see that here shortly.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the reserve study. If you hadn't watched the board meeting from last month,
No.
there was a full explanation of the reserve study and why it's needed, and why our reserves are woefully short.
What's in reserve right now?
About 14 million, and it's woefully short.
We have $360 million in assets. Think about that. We have $14 million in reserves.
They're there to replace assets long-term.
Okay.
I just have a question of clarification, and your response was very helpful. The year-on-year assessment then that went up, that will be going up to 9.1, that's a year-on-year, and in other words, it's not going to stay static at 9.1? No. Perhaps in 2 years, it could come down to 6, or...
Or it depends. It actually, if inflation does not exceed 5%, then it can't go over 5.
Then it could come back to 5 again. And it's all inflation-driven then? Is that, that's my, I just need to understand
That's your
that.
takeaway, and that's a good way to summarize it.
Okay, okay. So it's not static, it won't keep going up, it stays with the inflation rate, and once inflation comes down, it could be driven back to 5% again.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, just to give you another view, I showed this yesterday. This is a history of our cash balances, which are operating cash and reserves, from 2000 up to the September balance sheet this year. Those are the blue bars, and you can see over time, it was managed to be about $4 million a year. In the last 3 years, you can see the board with the assessments has been able to raise it to 14 million or so. The red line, which the axis on the right shows you the percent increase, shows you since 2000 what the percent increase on the assessment has been. And you can see in the years where total cash was managed to be about 4 million, reserves weren't being built. And you can see the assessment rate was not 5% very many of those years. 4 or 5 years ago, the board said we are going to keep assessments at 5% because we got to start building reserves, and you can see what's happened. The board has built reserves with the property owners funding that at 5% a year increase. But that rate changes every year based upon financial needs.
And by the way, we started on this path to increase our reserves when we built the Tokewood and Clubhouse and added the community center in Kahiti. Frankly, that drained our reserves.
Cap Rivers again. I understand the reserve study. I understand the water and sewer impact that we're all looking at coming down the road. And then yesterday, we were given this really nice detailed sheet. When I look at 2024 and I look at 2025, between those 2 years, we're going to take 3 years worth of additional monies to the reserve. We're going to spend it on golf, having another driving range, and then golf having a big entertainment and training center. So we're going to take 3 years additional monies that we're going to take out of the residents' pocket to basically fund, not to my mind, a need, but a want. And my concern is, I don't know how much these numbers have been scrutinized, but when you're talking about 9.1 versus 5, and then you're going to put that all onto some future wants rather than future needs, such as water and sewer, that gives me a great heartache.
And by the way,
While you're up there, can you show me what you just said, where the 2023 is going to have a... Okay, and then that comes up for next year's budget review. But the implication that you just made, that I heard as I walked back, is that we're going to put in a golf driving range, and no, we're not.
Well, it's not approved.
We cut it. Well, that's what I'm saying. Show me where it is. Show me.
Well, it's in there.
For 2023.
He's right.
We pushed it out. We deferred
It's
it.
not in there for 23.
It's in there for
But
24.
Pat, I said 24 and 25. I'm saying
Okay, so are we reviewing the 24 and 25 budget process today?
No, Pat, I hear what you're saying. We're reviewing the 23, but we're in the process of justifying going to a 9.1 to generate $500,000
No.
additional monies to go into the reserves. And as Steve just said,
Well,
that will
excuse
be
me,
to
Cap,
cover.
and I
that will
don't
be
mean to
cover-
interrupt you,
Cap,
but
excuse me a
you were on the
second.
board for 9 years, did a project that was out
I
in the
understand
schedule.
it's a-
Was it ever, cast in stone until the year it was going to be done?
No.
You're
Never.
making a
Never.
you are making a decision this next week
For
on 9.1 versus 5.
We're making a decision to consider an investment, yes.
You are making a decision to build the reserve up, which will give you additional funds to do certain things. And all I'm saying is, right now, you've got some of those additional needs, wants, whatever term you want to use, that's included in all of this detail, and you're building a decision today to create a reserve greater than we now have so that we can do things in the future. And some of those things that are detailed in here are not what I would call need, like water and sewer, which has been used to justify.
Okay,
that
Cap,
5.1.
just a comment, just to clarify for everybody once again, and I'd encourage everybody to go back and watch the prior board meeting where we went through the reserve study. The reserves that we talk about in the reserve study context are to take care of the assets that we have in hand. That's where roads, water, and sewer make up 85% of the $360 million at replacement cost of assets that we have. Any decision to build a new amenity, while it may be on this sheet for consideration, that does not get funded out of the reserves that we're talking about. That has to come from incremental funding. It could be debt. It could be a whole series of outside resources that come into play with it. But those are not items that are included in the reserve study, nor in the requirements called out by the reserve study. So let's be clear. I talked about 3 pockets of money. You got an operating pocket, you have a reserve balance that takes care of what we have, and then there needs to be a new amenity fund that does not exist today.
And with that explanation, Brad, where does incremental money for Tenacity rebuild, should we need beyond, where does that come from?
That would be from a new amenity. So I'm going to say like things like the Pickleplex, where there was incremental funding from the community, like when we built Kahiti and they came to the party and they brought incremental funding to build the Kahiti Clubhouse. Those are the kinds of things that it's going to take. If people want something that is incrementally bigger, better, whatever, than what we had. The insurance company will never pay for us saying, gee, we'd like to build it bigger and fancier. They're not going to do that. They're going to say, I'm going to pay for what you have. Here's the replacement cost of that. As our desires grow, we need to figure out how to pay for it, because it is not in today's reserves to do that.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to be clear. If the Tenacity rebuild ends up being, let's just say, $2 million more than the replacement value,
Yeah,
we've
that-
got to figure out a way to come up with that
That
money.
money is nowhere in what we're talking about.
It's not
right
in the
here.
reserves.
Yes.
Now, there is one caveat to all this. If we have return projects, and I want to talk about this later about our docks, which generate positive cash and have returns. Some of these long-term projects, such as a driving range and other projects, may have a return that can be justified on a business investment versus just building a restaurant, which today has 0 return. It has negative return to the village.
Okay, I just have a quick question. Bob Denny. I appreciate the intent that the reserves would never be used for something like that. My question is that documented anywhere in our documents that govern how we spend money? Is there anything, I understand that it would take 4 out of the 7 board members, but I'm not sure everybody would be comfortable knowing that 4 out of the 7 board members could vote to build something like that that wasn't intended to be supported by reserves.
I
Am
understand
I
what
making
you're
that
saying.
clear? Is there something that ties the board's hands and says under no circumstances
No,
can you
there
come
is
up with
not.
a brand?
The answer to your question is no, there is not anything that would tie the board's hands in the future.
Okay, I appreciate the answer, and
So-
I'm going to
So
take.
basically, it's, if a project can garner 4 votes,
Right.
and by the way, if I'm on the board, I guarantee you that if it's not going to pay for itself, I'm not voting for it. So.
Yeah, but see, I'm gonna stop you right there and ask, for one thing, you never know really if something is absolutely gonna pay for itself. But what I heard a few minutes ago was, no, the reserves are only there to replace things that are gonna wear out with time. And a new driving range is not something that's going to wear out with time, but if 4 of you believe, oh, it's going to make a profit, let's do it, you can do it. But that's not what the reserves are intended for.
I don't disagree with you.
So is there any way that we can make the community, make me more comfortable that even if you guys, had a brain fart and went ahead and said, okay, let's do this, that you can't?
No,
Okay,
there's nothing in the documents that would prevent a future board with a 4-3 vote to do exactly what you're suggesting.
And Bob,
Yeah.
there's another way that items get paid for. They come from operating cash.
Sure.
So let's suppose there was a project, and let's take the driving range, because I haven't seen the financials, but let's say it's a positive return, pays back in 8 years.
Okay,
That project could be paid for, stripped out of operating cash, never touch the reserves.
understand.
Or it could be paid for by timeless teleco, portion, so forth.
Sure, and that's.
But there
great.
is nothing that I know of in the documentations, if you look at the powers of the board of managing the POA, that power exists within the board to make business decisions, sell property, buy property, you name it.
Right, and I don't want you to think that I don't have the confidence that the board, I do have the confidence that the board would make, the right decisions. You guys have fiduciary responsibility to do that, and I believe that this board does. I have no idea who's going to be on the board next year, the year after, and I sure would like to have some comfort level, not only that these things, it probably won't happen, I'd love to know that it can't happen. And that's why I'm asking, there's no way that we can actually put something in a documentation somewhere that says under no circumstances can you guys spuriously spend this money on something you think will be profitable?
Let me
And
take
I'm hearing
that
no,
apart
there's
for
no
you.
way to do that.
Let me take that apart for you, and I'm going to start with my end statement, since yesterday I was asked why I didn't say this from the beginning.
And that was a great set of statements, by the way. I appreciate what you
But
said.
the reality is this. Your task as homeowners, now everybody's wanting to put all this load on the board or on management or anything else. Sorry, but your responsibility as a homeowner is to take the time, find out who's going to be on the board, and vote. That's where you've got your control. If you don't like what the board's doing, fire them and hire somebody else.
Yeah, and by that
That's
time, it
what
could be
you
too
as
late.
homeowners must do. It's not like it's a, gee, it would be nice. You've got to do that. The second thing is this. You live in Tennessee. Under HOA law, Tennessee is the Wild West. So the only thing you have in your favor, let's just say you allowed the wrong board members to get in and they just went wild. So there are some caveats in here, and you mentioned one, that the board has a fiduciary responsibility. If the homeowners raise their hand and say, we got a crazy board, the state, God bless them, will swoop in like the Black Death. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is the state will swoop in like the Black Death, and they will control your community. So the reality of it is, in answer to your question, I'm not really trying to be flippant about it, because I'm dead serious. If homeowners want to know what their control is, it's who they put on the board. Board members don't get put on by accident, they get voted on.
Sure, but I don't think any voter can predict with absolute certainty how a board member will react and how they will act once elected.
And that's true of all of us, by the way.
And that's why we have parts of our documentations, covenants and restrictions, articles of incorporations, that control the board activities. But I'm just looking at one activity that I sure would like to see controlled tighter, and evidently it just can't happen.
That's correct, but you also, and this community has done something also that I wanted to mention that is really important. There are committees here, and back to that whole what the state has involved with that, the committees come to the board and they make specific recommendations, which will happen in the case of the budget. The Finance Committee still has not made their recommendation to the board, but they will. And when they do, if the board goes, nah, we're not going to do that, there are state regulations that go, wait a minute, you put that committee in place to be an advisory to the board. So unless you got some really all-encompassing, nobody knew about this information to tell that committee no, you're in trouble out of the gate. In fact, that will be out of the community's hands. That, again, becomes under a state law. And so committees that you have in place are there to exactly be that stopgap, to exactly be the one going, whoa, here, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? And how did we get there?
So if a board overrules a committee recommendation, can actually be challenged legally?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No.
So everybody wants to complain about that.
No.
Okay, Mr. Attorney, look up case law.
I understand case law. The board has the ultimate control.
You're absolutely correct.
They
You
don't
can make that
absolutely have to follow everything that a committee recommends.
All true.
And in fact, I will tell you, there are things in this budget schedule that when they come to the board, I have questions.
So there's nothing wrong. There is that check and balance. But my point being is if a committee comes to the board and gives them their recommendation, does it mean they have to accept every piece of it? Of course not. But if a committee comes to a board and you wholesale say, no, we're not going to do that, there are implications because you're the one who put that committee in place. So yes, you do have the right to say, no, we aren't doing that. But there are ramifications when you do that.
I have a question for Jessica. Jessica, how many people have voted so far in the board election?
26% as of yesterday.
Because that's the answer to your question.
What he said.
On average, we never go over 30% of the village.
Which is better than national.
Well, it stinks.
Well, also, if I might, and again, with my cup of water, I have a tendency to do this because, again, Bob, as you and I have talked, I am a connoisseur of next door. The number of people has been tremendous if you add up all of the posts that are going on regarding this budget process. And the count today is that there are 28 people sitting here. There are 23 people online, and there are 13 staff or advisory committee members sitting here. So the net is there's 15 property owners there and 23 there, which I would say would be slightly less because my wife and other spouses.
And like 4 of my staff are watching, Nancy's watching, Winston's watching. So really, property owners are probably about 10 to 12.
That's what I was getting to. So we've got about 10 to 12 there, and we've got 15 property owners here. So we've got 25 property owners concerned enough to watch this program and gain correct information, but will go out on social media and expound and really go nuts on misinformation. Yeah, go ahead, Bob. Come on.
So Jessica, what's the number?
The number,
Okay. No, since Pat addressed that.
Well,
to me-
hang on.
No,
I want the answer to the question I asked.
Okay.
What's the number?
the number is 1,775 property owners that have voted, which is 26%.
Okay, 26%. And I'm not going to argue who votes and who doesn't.
Yeah.
But
That's
I'm gonna-
how you control your board.
that's not how I do it. I vote. I can't do for anybody else, and neither can anybody here. But my question is going to be, yes, there's an awful lot of apathy, if you want to call it apathy. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's the fault of the people out here that really don't care how their money's spent? Or maybe they don't have much confidence that they can come here and make an impact? Why would people come here and sit for 3 hours if they're not going to get anything out of it? I can tell you without question that is a lot of the opinion.
Okay.
And when you compare the number of comments on Nextdoor, you can look at the names, and there's probably not more than 20 or 30 people commenting.
Right.
They're just talking a lot.
Right, I know, and I've done that analysis too, and a typical really controversial subject on Nextdoor or Facebook generates about 3% of the Nextdoor and/or property owner population, accounting for over 70% of the comments. So you got to.
There's not 3% of the people
No, I mean,
commenting on Nextdoor. That's 300 people.
right. So I'm saying you got a very small group of people making comments that are the vast majority. When they then say, we are the majority, and in fact, they're not. They're a very small group of people. But again, taking the same argument that you hear and all the arguments that we hear on this board and the Finance Committee and all the other advisory committee members, there is a statements of you don't communicate with us, or we don't trust you, or the conversation I think you made is it's one way. But tell me how that's any different between my state representative, a council person on Loudoun County, a senator, a president, anybody else. I mean, well, I know, but you're putting it on us. And so my question is, yes, you are. So how do I communicate with everybody other than, hi, my name is Pat White. This is what we reviewed in last week's budget, and I want to sit here with you at your front door and review it with you. Because there's only, well, there's less than 25 people in the community right now interested enough in this. There's only 20.
I disagree with that conclusion. I don't think
The
they're not
num-
here because they're not interested. I think a lot of them are not here because they don't think they're going to make an impact.
So
I disagree.
So, yeah,
I disagree.
I think there's some. I think there's some.
Could I
But
ju-
I would agree with Pat.
Could I
don't
just
think
say
it-
that
Before you go,
this is
Roger,
probably-
One second.
Roger,
He's
before you
still
go,
talking.
I would like Brad maybe to give us a little update on the difference now between how we're handling reserves as an outcome of the reserve study versus how it had been done historically. Because in my very brief explanation would be, I believe in the past, reserves were handled like a savings account, and they were used. You know, we'd move them between. Other prior boards would move money in between the different categories as needed. Brad and the Finance Committee are really trying to put a lot more rigor around what goes into each of the buckets of reserves and how that's handled, both now and into the future. So I know it doesn't completely answer your question on, okay, how can we be sure? But we are trying to put a lot more restrictions and a lot more, I don't know what the right word is, but rigor around. Process around, yeah, what money goes into reserves and how to get it out. So Brad?
Yeah, and to Marty's point, and to your point, Bob, there isn't documentation that historically talked about how reserves would be used. So in the case, and I believe Toke was a good example, there were drawdowns of reserves to put frankly, a new amenity in place. It was the tear down of the old and the building of the new, but it was bigger, better, and that was done with reserves. Absolutely a legal thing to do. No issue with that. But as you start to study what communities like ours do around the world and how the association reserves process takes place and the regulatory structure around that, there are better practices, one of which we're pushing to adopt, which is you build reserves to take care of what you have. You build a second set of funds for new amenities and new things. And no different here than in any other state. I sat on the board of a complex up in Michigan. We had our reserves, and in Michigan, they're mandated what they have to be as a percentage of your dues, actually. We don't have that law here in Tennessee. But you would build up reserves. Those were to take care. If we decided, gee, we wanted a new tennis court, a new swimming pool, whatever that may be, that came from a totally separate pot of money. So we're trying to drive to those types of processes as we move forward into the future. And it's really, it was this summer that everything got wrapped up with the reserve study. And I think it was eye-opening for all of us how much the water, sewer, and road infrastructure, really was valued at and how much it's going to cost to maintain that. Part of the challenge, and it goes back to when the board first started to say, let's set a reserve target, they looked at what was on our fixed asset register, which is a very logical process to take. And they went and they studied that, and they said we should have a percentage of the net book value of that for reserves. The challenge in that is because so much of what was built in Tellico Village was contributed in kind from the developer, the fixed asset register never captured all the water system, all the sewer system, all the road system, And inherently, when we talk about $360 million of replacement costs today, huge chunks of it were never reflected on the books and records of the POA because they were submitted in kind and not, put on the books. And so that was a big reason that we as a committee said, let's do the reserve study, let's get a good firm foundation. It's a mathematical calculation, as I shared last time, so there will be tweaks and twists as to how it ultimately plays out throughout the next 30 years, but it's a good baseline for us to start to look at. So to Marty's point, this is really about changing process, putting in place the right governance systems, and I don't think you can ever totally tie a board's hands because you don't know what's going to happen. Chet talked about the disasters. I had a disaster where we had building construction issues, and I had to go knock on the door and do a special assessment. One of the worst experiences I've ever had of my life. But none of us could sell our properties until a fundamental flaw was fixed. And it wasn't on any of us who were buyers. It actually went back to a state inspector for something that was stupid in construction. And when he did that, 10 years down the road, it cost us all a lot of money. And so, those are the kinds of things that, horrible for a board to have to go undo a mess, but that's what can happen if you're not being prudent in how you build up your reserves to take care of what you have.
I think I might have forgotten what I was going to ask. But just a couple questions going way. Oh, Roger George, going way back. I think Cap started it. The reserve summary here. Are the rate increases that we're talking about tied to this reserve study spending? The proposal to go to 9.1 and 5, is that linked to the thing?
Correct. On the very top of that schedule, there's that 9.1 that shows the contribution rate for 2023.
Yeah.
We don't know what the future is, and so
Right.
we've taken an assumption that we're going to increase operations that will yield an additional 5% to those funds, and that's
Gotcha.
where those numbers come from.
But it's related to, this is kind of a roadmap as to what we think we're going to be spending, and that will affect our reserve balances that we're trying to build.
Correct.
Roger, the other thing is, if you look on that first page,
Yeah.
it shows reserve contributions. You can see where it starts at 7,857 up to 8.2 million and grows eventually several years down the road to $11 million.
Yeah.
The reserve study focused on what do we need to contribute to reserves on an annual basis.
Gotcha.
And what it tells us, and Brad can do a much better job than I, it says that we need to be at least at $8 million a year going into reserves, and that will grow because of inflation and economics.
Right.
So what this schedule gets you is the targeted contribution to reserves based upon our reserve study, which again, for everybody who's listening, it's the first one that's ever been done in the history of this village.
Yeah, I got you. So I think back to what Cap was trying to say, since all the rates that we're talking about and stuff is tied to these things in here and how to build that reserve, using the example of the golf entertainment facility for $1 million in 2025, that does impact the percentage that we're saying we need to get to build that reserve to X at the end of the period of time. So that makes a difference that that's in there for $1 million.
That impacts the ending balance. It doesn't impact the targeted contribution per year. And I'll let Brad talk about the contribution.
I think Roger makes a good point, because what happened in the workshops that we went through with each of the department managers and with the board over the last few weeks was a significant push of expected spending out of 2023, which is always the focus of, it's next year, this is really what's going to happen. There's a significant push out. I think Roger has raised a good point that what would be good to do would be to take and split which of these items would be traditional reserve funding items for maintenance and repair of existing assets? And then to the extent, and I think it's primarily in the golf community where Chris and the Golf Advisory Board have said there's some big ideas we'd like to bring to the board in the future and talk about business cases against. Okay, fine. Bring those down and say those are new amenity lines. That had not been segregated previously in the push-out. It was just.
Yeah, something,
we're not
something
gonna,
like that.
We're not
to
going to
where-
do it because.
Where we're looking at
And then you'll see Tenacity, it's in there for $4.65 million, which happens to be the exact figure that the reserve study said was the replacement cost on that building. That's what they're working with insurance against to go and get replacement cost coverage.
Yeah,
To
something
the extent
like,
we grow it, then there might be a Tenacity line that says bigger and better Tenacity adds this much down as a new amenity feature. So I think you raise a
Yeah,
good
so
point.
kind of
For
breaking the.
clarity is to split those
Because
into
you
those
guys were
two
talking
buckets.
originally strategic things.
Yep.
We gotta have these.
Yes.
Okay, that's gonna say,
And
we're gonna need
it's different than a
X
new amenity
percent
desire, yes.
to get there, but this includes all the other things we'd
Great.
like to have.
It's a very valid point.
So what, as a property owner, say, well, if we don't really need these things, do we in fact need, and I'm not gonna debate the 9%, but do we need that much? Or how does it, what's the difference?
Very
How does
valid
it
point.
look?
Yep.
Okay?
So Brad, I guess an additional point of clarification. In the past, we have had a new amenity reserve, right? So what happens to that going forward based on this reserve study?
So I frankly think it needs to be created. It does not exist as an item today. And there was an amenity reserve which was meant to take care of amenities that we have. It was not necessarily a new amenity reserve. And as I say, in the past, the reserves were used a bit like a piggy bank. Just like you said, you could fund new amenities out of it. We really need to create that third category, and I think that's what Roger was saying in the context of that. Split that out so you can see all the various chunks as we go forward.
Yes, because I personally, I believe that we need to have something like that, rather than always just trying to figure out how we're going to fund any new amenity that we have a business case for.
I think you've answered it, but in the past, there was an amenities reserve. Matter of fact, Cap will probably remember it very well, and that was, kind of reduced and done away with. And it needs to be, in my opinion, needs to be recreated, which is right where you're all going, so that's good.
And that, just to speak to that just a little bit, the Kahiti Community Center and Tokwa Clubhouse, that's where the funds was drawn. That's what we have used the amenity reserve for. We have $2 million sitting in the amenity reserve, and it is for new amenities. It's what we've always used it for.
Well, one thing I want to add about the process, and, Brad hit on it a little bit. When we went through the original investment sheet, because that's what I look at this stuff is investments, is we asked one question: does it have to happen in 2023? Because 2023 is going to be a very difficult year. Between supply chain and inflation, if it didn't have to happen, it got pushed out, period. So every manager had to answer the question, what happens if we don't do it next year? And if the answer was, well, nothing's going to happen, then it got pushed out of the budget.
My name is Jim Vershave. I've got a couple questions. Is there a projected cap on the reserves that can be self-sustaining because of compounding interest and such? So that'd be my first question.
We built the reserve study, which is, again, taking care of our existing assets on a cash flow basis, is the way we had them build the model. So we're not trying to hit a magic reserve balance out there. Each year, there will be ebbs and flows in what we're contributing versus what's flowing out, depending upon what major project you have to work or don't work in any given year. So reserves, by definition, will be an oscillating balance that happens over
Right,
time, but it's based on the cash flow, which of course includes all the inflation models out there of you know, what's going to happen, just like we see the 5% increase here, correspondingly, you also have your cost increases that are hitting. And that $360 million goes well north of $1 billion of replacement costs when you get out 30 years, just by the law of compounding interest. So that's the other piece to remember, is that 360 is a today number, and it grows in what it's going to cost to replace that as well.
I understand that, but there should be, I'm guessing, at least a projected number that says roughly at 50 million or 100 million that we should be sustaining. And it's going to fluctuate. I understand that. We don't know what the future holds.
Again, if there's a 30-year cash flow projection that is available in the reserve study that takes, here's all the assets we have, here's what the future replacement costs are going to be, here's what it's, you know, you need to have in the till to be able to cover those when they come due. That's laid out over a 30-year period in the reserve study.
Okay, so that's just an arbitrary number. Could be.
It bounces up and down. It's not a magic, you know, if we get to 50, everything's okay. And, you know, like we said today, at 14 of reserves against 360 of assets in place, you know, not nearly enough. And if you say, okay, in 30 years out, we're at that $1 billion for that same level of assets to replace them, by definition, it's got to be a lot bigger number than it is.
Okay, the second question, I guess, is with the future sustaining projects, self-sustaining projects, like Rick said, that you wouldn't have a project that's not self-sustaining. Is Tokwa and Tenasseee, do we subsidize those, or are they self-sustaining? And if we have to build a building that's $2 or $2.5 million bigger, is that going to be self-sustaining? I mean, without our subsidies, is I guess what I'm saying.
I'll give you my take. Today, under the current AWE contract, we get some rent paid in Tokwa, about $2,000 a month. AWE pays for like propane and those kind of direct costs, but the contracts are written whereby any building maintenance, equipment maintenance, it's on us. Heating and air, on us. We're going to take a hard look at our food service contracts in 2023. For many a year, I've said we probably ought to take the business out for bid and structure it like a commercial deal. Again, I'm talking for me, not for the board. And possibly have a deal where they pay some real rent that covers the cost. But what you see in the subsidy is not a cash payment to AWE, it's the overhead costs that we absorb because there's not enough rent being paid by AWE. So such things as I mentioned, building maintenance, depreciation, equipment maintenance, that's on the property owners.
Okay, so it really isn't self-sustaining, though.
No, it is not.
Okay.
No. So
Okay.
the prices that are being paid, we are not seeing anything coming back to the POA to offset. So when we say subsidy to AWE, it's not cash. It's in kind with having use of our building and the equipment.
Do you ever see in the future where it would be self-sustaining?
I would like to see it where it's run as a commercial operation, but that's me. I'm one vote.
Okay. All right, that's it then. Thank you.
I have an online question that's been up here for a while. Hold on, let me find it again. Can we alter governing documents to require a supermajority vote in order to redirect our misused reserve funds? So I guess it's saying, can the governing documents be altered
Well, of course, they can be altered.
at a high cost?
They can be altered, and in fact, they have been altered once in the past. It cost, what, about $90,000, I believe? I'm sorry, what?
Took over 3 months.
Took over 3 months. The CNRs require a 2/3 majority of all property owners, and that's more than just the people that live here. And so you got to chase down those property owners.
And we have such a good record of voting.
All right, another question is, why is the earning rate so low? A simple 3-month step treasury ladder out to 3 to 5 years would increase earnings significantly. And that's from Gary.
Thank you. The funds that we are going to be invested in are going to be very conservative. No opportunities for loss, and so when you add the risk and the reward to that, you're going to get a lower return because we want to ensure zero risk on the funds within what we're trying to perform here. My first take when I came in was just that, hey, we can do much better than 3%. And then when you start factoring in that we are financially responsible for not losing any of these investment funds, it requires us to be a lot more frugal and choosing where we can invest these funds.
I'm going to ask, is this an appropriate time? There has been some discussion about docks, about food service here in the last to propose some ideas as far as how to bring in some additional revenue. Would this be an appropriate time to do that, or would you like to do that at a different time? Or
I think we should probably do that another time, Roger, because it won't impact.
And this is not my full-blown,
Yeah,
I'm not meaning that at all.
But unless it can impact next year's budget, I would say that would probably better be served in a board meeting, or
Okay.
a different forum.
Then this will impact next year.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to wait till the check comes back.
Can do that. Yep. I'll just come back when he's here. But yeah, these all impact directly what we could do next
Okay.
year.
So does anybody else have a question in the interim then? Go ahead.
Irene Roberts. I just have a comment. When you raised the assessment 9.1% this year, next year, when you raise it 5.5%, that 9.1% keeps carrying on because it's based on the new assessment of the increase at your 9.1%. It's compounded. So I just want people to be aware of that.
Yeah, to be sure, the additional, if it goes, then if they recommend 9.1 over 5, that's $6.30 a month, which is a little over, like, let's say it's, what is it, 500 and some odd $1,000 to the POA reserve fund, and over 4 years, that would raise $2 million. It does not go away.
No,
But it is $14 higher than today.
Right, but of that, $6.30 is the difference between 9.1 and 5%.
Yeah, but once you raise it, that amount of money, it's going to keep affecting all your assessments.
That's why I
right
said
down the line.
in 4 years, that would have put another $2 million in the reserve fund.
Yeah, that's what compounding is all about.
Sorry, he called me up. I guess the issue that I'm having is maybe the spreadsheet per se, because it starts out with beginning reserve balances, then it talks about reserve spending, and then it talks about strategic initiatives. And the things that I was mentioning earlier about the driving range and that, they are considered a strategic initiative, and that's what's used to then get to the last sheet back here, which talks about ending reserve balances, which is that last number over there at 49 million. And this particular one that we got yesterday talks about the ending being at 44 million. So
strategic is just the first 5 lines?
Difference at the end of 2031 versus that at 9.1 versus 44 million, what we got yesterday. And I don't know what other numbers may or may not have changed, but every item that's on here detailed, excuse me, I appreciate, a lot of those won't come to pass, and they'll be discussed in the future. But they were on here to create what the theoretically ending balances on the reserves as we go forward. That's my only, the only reason I wanted to bring them up.
Yeah, I think we acknowledge that, Cap, and that's one of the things that Mickey said. He's going to identify those items that are really capital versus what should come out of the reserves. And the other, and I'm sorry, one more point I wanted to make. not this whole list is strategic. If you look, the first 5 items are, even though it looks like that heading is for everything, it's for the first 5 items that then under the subcategory say strategic. Okay? Just for clarification.
Earlier, I heard a comment that 2023 is going to be a very difficult year, and obviously in light of inflation, recession potential, those are the obvious why 2023 may be a difficult year. But in simple, general, high-level terms, can you explain why 2023 is going to be a very difficult year in addition to the
Well, for one thing, supply chain issues. The kitchen equipment for Kahiti, if it were ordered today, probably wouldn't come in till near the end of the year. The inflation obviously is going to be an issue. Everything that we buy, we pay more for now. And in fact, as we go into next year, that's probably going to continue. That's not going to abate right away, no matter what happens nationally. So, yes, that's why I say it's a difficult year, especially when you're trying to formulate a budget and you've got major investments in your water and sewer system and roads.
Not to mention, you also got the whole issue with what are you going to do with tenacity?
Yeah, that makes it an even more difficult year.
I tend to think in terms of context. Context rules. One of the things that I think is forgotten, every board member here is a property owner. So the decisions that are made are not made in an abstract that does not affect them. It does affect them. And to what extent that goes through their minds, that I don't know, but I can't imagine that it doesn't. Now we go back to the problem that I've been harping on. That message has to, part of the message that has to get out there. That this is not 7 people sitting here as a hierarchy making decisions that don't affect them. It does. And I think that is absolutely needs to be kept in mind. Every dollar that we're talking about, whether we're talking about $6.30, every single board member is subject to that $6.30, just as I am. Okay?
And just to add to that, I want to make sure that everybody understands that the Finance Committee is the same way, the Finance Advisory Committee. So how many members are on the Finance Advisory Committee, Brad? 7. So, I mean, they're the ones recommending it as well. So it's just not, I know the board has the ultimate decision, the 7 of us, but certainly we take high consideration as to what the Finance Advisory Committee recommends.
There we go. Now I got a microphone. It's taken me a year to learn how to press this thing down to get it turned on. Thank you, Don, very much. Because apparently the high-level understanding is, and I've mentioned this in the board, and I thought it was a perfect segue, because I've been wanting to say this for the last couple of days, is that my personal opinion, being a board member and a property owner, is I want everything for free. I've said this many times in finance meetings and in board meetings. I think I pay an assessment and everything should be free. I should pay golf free, boat slips free. I should pay recreation fee. But when I went back and I added up, I'm paying over $6,000 for all my user fees for a year. That's ridiculous. But at the same time, it can't be free. It can't be what I want. Because as soon as you have a basis of revenue of assessments and user fees, then the user fees go away, and just to make me happy, we're going to go downhill in a hurry. So I do not want a 5% increase. I don't want a 1% increase. I definitely don't want a 9.1% increase because this affects me and everybody here and every board member, advisory committee member, and every property owner. But as our reserve study has shown, as the graph Steve puts up there shows, if we've had historically for the last 35 years a method of collecting assessment fees and user fees that allow us to build, spend, and keep it right on the edge of disaster, that's not very prudent. So Brad, Steve, a number of people in the community decided that we need a reserve study. Steve, who was on that with you? Johnson? Bruce Johnson?
Yep.
Did a informal reserve study over the last couple of years, came up with a number. They didn't have a lot of faith in the number, neither did we, so Brad and his finance committee decided that we need a formal reserve study, and it was shocking. You have two choices. You can either do what we have been doing in the past and have an outcome of what Chet talked about yesterday if something disastrous happens, or you can say, we really like living into this community and we need to protect it long term. Again, I understand that this is compounded, but that compounded difference between 5 and 9.1 is going into these reserves. Rather than coming to you and saying, we need a special assessment to jack this up real quick. That's what we're doing. Again, thank you very much. I don't want to pay anything. I know.
Mickey, are you going to go through the capital, or?
That was the plan, to go back through it.
Okay, I'll wait for when you go through that for my next question.
Before you move on, we had one more question. When it went back to the risk of investments, it says, what is lower risk than treasuries?
We'll have to do some evaluation. I'm not far enough into it to say. I appreciate the inquiry.
Okay, I'll switch gears to, rather than talk about should the assessment be 9.1 or 5, or we don't like that, to here's some ideas. I'm going to keep it real short as to some things that you guys talked about. I'll try as specific as I can to them for generating additional or making a decision a little different. Talking about the dock delay. Yesterday, we talked a bit about, if on anything, if we delay something to a further year, we know it's going to be more expensive. So in looking at that, I looked at the 32 docks that were proposed that were approved for next year, and depending on what percentage of increase we've got, by holding off a year, just the cost avoidance on waiting, that dock being more expensive at 15% increase will be $41,000 it'll cost us more. If the increase from one year to the other is 25, it goes up to $68,000. So that's a cost avoidance we could have if we went ahead with the plan to put it in now. In addition to that, the new rates of bringing in the revenue for those 32 docks would be $26,000 a year. So in total, at the lowest level, with just the $41,000 cost avoidance on waiting on the dock, we would, in essence, save $67,000 by going ahead this year versus waiting a year. And depending on what that increase, again, that could go all the way up to $94,000. So just something to think about with that particular decision, that perhaps in the long run, it will be more cost effective to go ahead in '23.
You hit on the one item I wanted to talk about, is I was going to ask the FAC, between now and next Wednesday, take another look at, does it make sense to keeping the docks in next year because it has a positive ROI, generates cash sooner. So that's what I'd like you to look at and let it give us a recommendation, because I know when we looked at putting those smart meters in, the analysis said it doesn't make sense to put them all in, but it may make sense to move that dock.
Yeah, and we've also, we also spent the money although not a lot, to move NDOC in preparation. So we've already got that spent. Just worth another good look. I think we, in the end, would perhaps save a little bit money. And like you say, Steve, that is the only revenue generating amendment we got. So you think, well, should we put something that makes money off? Or should, you know, I don't think so. And then look at some other things of what can we do about reducing costs for ones that we've currently got going, which is next. Specifically to Tenacity Rebuild, the board.
Roger, thank you.
Yep.
Before you go on, I think my message has gotten across, huh? At least I got one guy.
No, I mean, I just was listening to yesterday, and I get in trouble thinking, but sometimes I stumble on something. So, real quick on the Tenacity Rebuild, I know the board members, Chet's seen my little proposal. It's completely against what I originally wanted, because I'm a Tenacity guy. I got my boat down there. I got my wave runner down there. I love Tenacity where it's at, but with the difficult year coming up, perhaps, and I'm going to call this phase 1, phase 2, perhaps we build something back. We've got the golf accommodated with either a large snack shop or a small restaurant to get us by, and within the money that we're going to get for insurance or less. So we get all those things satisfied, at least for now. We build it such that the plan is that if in the future or when we need it, if we need it, we can then expand it into that thing that we'd really love to have. There's a couple other reasons in behind it. The yacht club's already, not very utilized. We've got a lot of utilization open there. We've got docks there already that will accommodate boaters where Tenacity doesn't. So that's just one, and you guys have got the detail of it that I think we ought to really consider, even though break my heart not to be able to go down to Tenacity, get my big whatever and be convenient, but I think more prudent. Food service is a real quickie. I think, as you guys all know, last year we actually, the POA got back a little over $50,000 in profit sharing, first time ever, okay? This year, 2022, for some reason, we wiped out the subsidy. For everybody out there that still doesn't know that, we don't pay any subsidy this year for restaurants, first time ever, okay? Cash. Well, we've got all the other, yes. But we also dropped out that provision to profit share, which, in my opinion, it looks like 2022's online to make a profit with the increased people that we've got with COVID having gone by the wayside. The chances of profits in the future are probably higher than they have ever been in the past. So to me, I would in 2023 add that profit sharing provision back in there for one, to get some money. The other thing would be to, just looking at the dining room and kitchen only at the yacht club, if we charge rent, the same rent that we charge for our commercial properties here, same rate, that would bring in $93,000 a year. So that would be something to consider in the immediate. I know long-term, like you guys have said, you're going to look at the whole thing. I think that's a good idea. A major change would probably not be good in 2023, but a couple of these things, I think, could net back enough money to take care of some of the line items that are for spending in the strategic part. Chip one off, okay? Just from those two things alone. Basically, I think that's about it. There's a few nuggets there I think that we could consider that could bring some immediate money, save us a ton of money on the Tenacity thing, that also has built into it the opportunity to go to what everybody loved to have down the road.
Thank
Thanks.
While I, in principle, agree with Steve that restaurants should be looked at from a commercial standpoint. However, there's a flip side to this. The minute you take that subsidy away, then the price that we're going to have to pay for a hamburger or whatever is going to go up. Okay? What does that do to the traffic pattern, the traffic flow that we now have at all of these facilities? Okay? So that is something that also has to be taken into consideration. You know, if you just let me give a dumb number for a moment. If a hamburger now costs us $1, and we now say, no, we're going to put this on a commercial basis, and that hamburger is now $2, how many people are going to want to still come in and pay $2 for a hamburger when they used to pay $1? I think that has to be factored in somehow, okay?
Good point. Thanks, Don.
Quick comment on that one. We're already paying the higher price, even with where we're at now. Our prices are as high or higher than all the competitive restaurants around the area already, even with all the indirect subsidies that we provide and the benefits for our current food provider. And it doesn't matter which food provider it is. This goes for anybody who would be in there.
My name is Nancy Johnson, and with regard to your comments, and I think most of us who do eat at the restaurants here, a lot of it is because it's convenient to drive to. We don't have to go all the way into Lenore City. We don't, God forbid, go to Knoxville. And so that convenience factor, plus the food generally has been good, but I do think that the idea of looking into having a professional other than that, the one, who is it? Yes, someone other than that might be a good thing to do. My questions right now really pertain more to your, possibly the operating budget. The two questions are, when is the CC land loan going to be paid in full? Like, it's a 5-year loan, so is that considered in your operating budget, repaying that loan for all those lots and everything, the $5.3 million? Is that in your budget now as you pay it off each month?
So the original plan, number one, we are paying on the loan.
Right.
The original plan was we acquired some major parcels of land.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And those will be put out for developer bids.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get money from developers for those pieces of land, those will go to pay down that debt. That was the plan all along.
Okay, all right. The other thing is, when COVID first came up, I believe the federal government had a PPP program or something where they gave money to various communities, and I think we received something, was it $1 million or so?
It was about $1.1 million.
Okay, is that going to have
It's
to
in
be-
the reserves.
Okay, is that going to have to be repaid at all?
No.
or is
No.
that- So that's a gratis?
Yeah, we got a loan forgiveness through the process within the year, so.
Okay, all right, well, that's all I had. Thank you.
So just as a point of reference on your first question, page 5 of your handout, which they put up here, shows all of our debt.
Okay, thank you.
It always scares me when people sit down.
Sorry? No, I don't plan to be here that long.
Sorry.
I'm Ken Litke. First, I had the same comment about the docks. It was made earlier. I think we should go ahead with it as soon as we can. It will, and what was forgotten, it will help a lot of people too there. We've been waiting for docks for a long time. And I think it sends a good message to have that. We've already done the work. We've moved the dock over. And let's get that dock cost avoidance for waiting longer, but as well as it will be revenue coming in and a real benefit to the people who've been waiting. I think cost avoidance is a big thing we should look at. And it was discussed yesterday. I think Clayton said about trying to enforce conservatism on water usage. And this was having even odd watering recommendation. Now, that recommendation was made, but frankly, I haven't seen a lot of follow-up on it as to what the results are and what progress has been made and what benefits have been seen, and to continue to push that. I think the board should continue to have increased communications on that, so to tell people how they're doing and where they can continue to work on it, which I think that should be done, and that's a definite cost savings for the future, which we can all, and we're all used to that where we come from, even odds, so it should be fairly easy to implement, I would believe.
Well, we've reviewed it in PSAC meetings, but if I might ask, because you make the agenda, Clayton and Marty, could you guys get together and have an agenda item coming up that we could review this? Because you got the information, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I think in general terms, he addressed it earlier in a board meeting, but we'll certainly come back with real
Sure.
data. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because I'm not even sure how many people are even aware of it. I mean,
And certainly, it'll, like you said, it'll be a big push before irrigation season next year.
Exactly. It's push for that and get it implemented, and it'll become ingrained on people to do that through the whole year. The other question I had is on slide 38. That could be pulled up. On the RV lots, talk about revenue. I don't know about you, but it seems like most of the construction goes around here is putting in parking lots and RV storage. I mean, it seems like half the construction is those kind of lots. And I don't understand why, if our actuals are 270, we're forecasting a decrease in RV storage. Leased.
There were a couple of changes to allow for the RVs to be able to move through there, and as a result of that, they lost 2 or 3 lots, 2 or 3 of the spaces.
Well, I think we should be finding out how to increase the spots. We have land back there, and there was some construction went on back there. I mean, I can't believe it's being lowered. With a demand that's apparently exists everywhere, that's a revenue maker, with very little cost input to get it going. Especially with people moving here, I think having...
Yes, it is full. And we are currently, where we have been working on a Tenassi restoration project down there, and we've had to have some dirt and stuff in there. We have an area where we've been removing some red clay in one of the areas at the shop to where we're working toward building another RV storage area right now. So
that would be great.
Okay, Mickey, you want to just continue on with the review of the capital items?
So our reserve spending schedule, and again, these are funds that are going to be generated from operations. We're going to assume that right now we're earning a 3%, which will decline, I think, as the economy changes. We expect to get $2.4 million in additional insurance proceeds. We have applied for a TDEC grant that's related to this project for the sewer, and we anticipate being able to get that $2.1 million in 2024. And then we have the funding based upon the earnings rates that we have shown up here. So there's a few projects that are strategic in nature, and I've highlighted them here, and I apologize if it wasn't clear. But the accounting software and systems need to be replaced. The Kahidi Kitchen's been on the budget, I think, for a couple of years now, and so we're pushing that. The Yacht Club elevator, and then finally the Tenassi rebuild that currently is slated on here for $4.6 million, which is equal to the insurance proceeds. And the sewer program project that just came up, and it was originally with a refurbished system, but now they're going to go new, so I'll change that reference, but it's a total of $5.4 million. Some of that cost will hit in 2023. We don't really know what that number is yet, but it's estimated that it'll be $1 million. And this 4.4 may go over a 2-year period, depending on the life of the project.
I have a question. Clayton, when is that coming to the board?
this coming board meeting.
Okay,
Next week.
then I'll ask you my question in advance. What was the rationale that PSAC used to say, you know, we have to have an absolute all-new system? Because there were two proposals. And you don't have to answer it today. I'll expect that answer next Wednesday.
Yes, and that is very defined. We have very good reasoning.
Okay.
Okay.
Beyond the strategic purchases, each of the groups were requested to submit all of their expected capital. And it was kind of a broad, what do you think you would need? And so as a result, there were a lot of lines, and you can see on the schedule, there are a lot of capital purchases. And so once we got into that process, as the board pushed back on it and asked for only the things that are absolutely critical for 2023, you'll see that the amounts that we've posted in here for most of these projects are fairly lean. In addition to that, we took an effort to try to project out certain types of expenditures that we know are going to be ongoing and recurring. Sewer is clearly one of those. Roads are another, and then there's some HVAC costs that are repetitive. And so they had some studies that went with these, and we've added those costs directly from the studies into these lines, and we'll cover those as we go through it. Each of them is broken down within a division, so I'm going to filter on just those as they pertain. So from an administrative section, there's nothing for 2023. We have some studio remodeling that we think happens every so often. And then there's some point-of-sale systems and some router systems that we think will be replaced. It's hard to predict what will happen, but those individuals that have some knowledge about these are looking forward and trying to predict out to the future when and what we expect to show. On the commercial property, we plan to go in and repave the parking area. So this $150,000 will be added to the fees that each of the tenants will pay. This $150,000 is divided over a 5-year period, and so that $50,000, excuse me, the $30,000 will then be calculated as part of their CAF fees and will be assessed to them on a monthly basis based on their square footage. So this $150,000, while it's an expenditure of 2023, it'll be recouped over a 5-year period.
Nikki, can I ask a real quick question? Kind of, you know, in the vein of what Roger was asking about on the ODOC, and maybe you can help me too, is the kayak that we pushed, kayak storage, is that the Kahiti kayak storage? Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, there's kayak storage associated with that dock because of the positioning of it.
Okay.
There's also,
Oh.
the whole thing's falling apart. I have a hard time with these. So,
Right.
without a doubt. So there's kayak storage that's also proposed, you recall, with the utilization of existing spaces that we have on existing docks.
Right, and isn't that in the 300,000 that's in that line item for ODOC?
Yep, part of it is, yep.
Okay, so, I guess I was asking about, I know that isn't there supposed to be a Kahiti kayak storage that was supposed to?
Yep, that's the
That's the 70,000?
the 70,000, and then that multiple use of existing dock, rearrangement, spacing, whatever, that was the 2025 200,000.
Okay, well, that was for Tenassi, according to
Well,
this.
that's for everywhere.
Oh, well, it says Tenassi. Well, I guess my point was going to be, if that 70,000 is something that's going to generate revenue, and I'm assuming it would, is that another thing for us to look at?
Well, as you've heard me, and again, okay, Rick, so you can say it now, you're lighting my fire again, right? As you've heard me say over the last 2 to 3 years, everything that we've proposed generates revenue. This is not new. This went back to the first dock being canceled in 2019 and then delayed in 2020. Put one in 2021 and then in 2022, and I finally am making my point. It's generating money, folks.
Yeah, but what's the payback?
Exactly. It's $32,000 a year in revenue. Over a 10-year period, you're buying the dock. But the money, and again, we get back into this debate, it's not the real money, Patio. It's not 300,000, it's not two, but I can't get the number, but we're generating a net positive revenue of over $250,000 a year, boaters are, into the general fund that can pay for the dock immediately. But, oh, no, that's, no, that's not
Okay,
true.
so Pat, I just wanted to know, or highlight that this 70,000, maybe we should look at to see if it is going to get us payback in whatever Brad's years are that we need to pay back.
You don't want Brad's years, because he's like 3.
Oh, well,
I
okay.
mean, honest answer.
Yeah,
But
well,
it's-
that's what it
I
was.
also
That's what it
fully-
was where I lived
Yeah.
for a long time, too.
Yeah, I also fully understand that docks are the largest constraint to people being able to enjoy an amenity that we have.
Right, well, this
of
this
anything out there,
specifically
so,
is kayak storage, and if I understand, and please tell me where I go wrong here, haven't these people already put a deposit down for this storage?
The ones in Kahiti, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they put down a $50 deposit to show their seriousness and this proceeding along. There's also, of that 200 people on the wait list to get a dock, there's a deposit for that as well. Now,
Okay.
again, for the general
Point well taken.
population, if you're exasperated and you say, I'm not going to get one next year, by all means, go to the POA office and get your money back.
Okay.
But then when you see in '24 that it's going to be put on, you'll go to the bottom of the list. You could be number 257, who knows? There's a risk and reward involved in both.
Okay, so I guess my point, Mickey, is if you could, like, highlight that one as something to take a look at what the payback might be.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm a simple guy, and I guess maybe I'm confused again. I'm looking at line item 1. It says jet ski slips 10 additional. So is that a new amenity? Well, it sounds like, doesn't it?
Well,
It's an amenity that wasn't there, and we're proposing a new amenity, and it's coming from reserves. And I thought you guys told me you would not do that.
And what you're looking at here is that, and which one are you looking at?
Line item 1. Jet ski slips, 10 additional.
An out year.
Yeah, it's an
30
out
grand.
year. We pushed it out to '24.
I don't care whether you push it out to 3010. You said you wouldn't do that.
No,
Like 10
we
minutes
said
ago, we
in
talked about
20
that, I thought.
2023 budget.
No. I'm talking about
Bob,
what can
yes.
be spent from reserves.
Bob, we also
Exactly to
said,
what Roger pointed out, this list now needs to get sorted between what's existing
Okay,
and what's new.
excellent.
And to your, so let me give you the exact anomaly here, 2 lines.
Yeah,
One of them is replacing existing ones.
okay,
That's the 2023 number, coming out of reserves. The other one, exactly to your point,
Yeah.
if it's incremental, we should think of that as a new amenity.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
And that's exactly what we said we'd do with Roger, is to take that list
Right.
and parse it, because this list, from a finance committee perspective, the focus is the '23 budget and building to '23. There's a lot of things on that list that the departments have identified, these would be great things to have.
Yes.
That does not say we've agreed to have those in the
Understand.
future.
Yeah,
So-
and
so
that
think-
wasn't my concern.
Think about the '23, but
Right.
you're spot on. There's
Okay.
things to go split.
Right, so
And
by
a-
next,
A
by
new
next.
driving range would be on that new amenity list. A
God
golf
bless you.
entertainment center on that new
Thank
amenity
you.
list.
So
Should go
I
through.
guess I'm going to anticipate that by next Wednesday, that's going to be cleaned up. Before you guys actually say, good budget, let's go.
I think that's a very valid item, yes.
Thank you.
And again,
Realizing it
we've,
doesn't impact current budget.
yeah, we've already parsed and went through with each department and shoved literally millions of dollars. out of 23 that we said, not this year. So that scrubbing has happened in the 23, but I'm fully on board that we should split the list for the future.
And I see Sue left, but for Sue's point, just to give you an idea, and this is net revenue. This is after everything's paid for on the docks and that. Without the new Cooper docks, we'll be right about 293,000 this year. That'll go back to POA. And if you add in the Cooper dock, it'll be about 330,000. So that's current numbers for what net, after everything's paid for, goes to the POA.
Roger, we need to make sure that as you're sharing numbers, you remove the gas revenue and the gas costs out of that.
This is not gas at all.
Well, if you take what we get on docks and then hit all the maintenance items we're facing next year, I don't think that's an accurate statement. And the capital, that is not an accurate statement. So
Okay.
I specifically asked this year to have gas pulled out so we can see it, because it is a big chunk of.
So we're losing money on gas?
We're not losing money on gas. We're making money on gas. But
Okay.
that making money on gas reduces the comments you just made there.
And if you have more boaters, Roger, what's going to happen with gas usage? Okie dokie.
Yeah, I think, no, I see that adds to this. The revenue from gas adds to the revenue from boat leasing.
If you go
so
to
it'd be
the
higher than
subsidy
that.
side of it, that includes the gas profits are in there. So,
Well, I just took the number of slips times the slip rental that we've got, multiplied it out, plain old slip times
Okay.
fee. And traditionally, over the last several years, our maintenance is running right around 40 to 45% of the total received, which nets out at the numbers I gave you. But we can look at that.
Any other questions about any of the capital expenditures related to docks?
This question isn't about docks. On page 5, and this is going to help educate me, even though I was there, it's not what I remember. The TRDA lease, says you can maybe help me here too. I thought when that was renegotiated as a $400,000 fixed payment, but I didn't realize there's a 4.5% interest rate on that. I thought it was negotiated as just a strict amortization on a $400,000 per year basis. And that's what I thought when I was sitting on the board that we voted for. I didn't know that any residual balance was going to carry an interest.
The lease terms are written exactly what you're saying. There's an accounting principle that we're required to report on that shows a capital lease and impute the interest rate. So while it is a technical $400,000 flat lease with a term at the end of it, for our reporting purposes, we're obligated to treat it as if it's a loan.
Right, so you got a principal payment and you got an interest payment
Right.
for financial accounting purposes.
Right, but the total amount that goes
So-
out
It's
is
$400,000.
$400,000.
All right.
And
so,
it terms
so
that,
I know I'm an accountant, but I guess so even though we've renegotiated the lease, so to speak, and it now has a fixed amortization with no lease or no interest charges, it's still, we still have to put an
Cap,
imputed
for
interest
financial
on it
reporting
under the
purposes,
CPA
you must
rules.
impute the interest
yeah.
and amortize it as if it's a loan per financial reporting purposes. Cash flow, $400,000 a year.
Why then is it 4.5%? Why not 2% or 3%?
It was an evaluation that was made at the time of it.
It's called accretion.
Golf cart leases hit that same criteria now, too. But it's 400,000 of cash, that's important for us.
On the food group, there's no capital expected to be spent for 2023. See each of the items that could be at the yacht club. and all of the out years. Tried to go in through this and understand the life of the assets, how they're going to wear, when we think we'd have to replace. So things like tables and chairs, we currently have no need for them, but we know that at some point in the future there's a need, and that's how some of these out items were developed. For golf, there's just a handful of things that were in this current year. Some fans, there's a new truck that we anticipate replacing, some mowers, small mowers, spraying rigs. As we've gone through that as well, we've tried to pick up those items that have some type of a cyclical nature. If you have 12 mowers, at some rotating basis, you'll have to do some replacements on those, and we tried to include those out into these out periods. Parks and Rec, 2 court resurfacings at $60,000 are slated for the year, and 1 small vehicle to help maintain the walking trails that are around the properties. Parks and Rec obviously is the biggest spending. It's where most of the assets are. Public Works, excuse me. It's where most of the expenses are. And again, it's got the largest fleet, and so you're going to see some repetitive costs that are going to go out there. There's a new program that Clayton and his team are trying to put in to monitor the valve and prevent some of the failures that we've seen. There's a study on some of the water systems, and so they've now made some expectations over the course of this period to spend $12.6 million on redoing some of the water systems within the community. $300,000 for this year. There's a water tank at Choda. Some excavation, some tools, replacements. Parking lots, we're looking at evaluating the possibility of expanding some of those parking areas. So there'll be some studies that we're expanding this year with the anticipation of spending upwards of $500,000 at 3 locations over the next 3 years. This is the conversion of the meters and the Smart Earth reading devices. Originally, this was a $2 million project, but we didn't have enough information to warrant spending that $2 million and the return on it. We'll need to go back and redo some evaluations of what revenues. We've started converting some of these meters, and there are some that we already have in line to continue, and that's what this represents. Once we have some data as to how much revenue each of those changes in the meters will generate, we'll come back in and try to provide the FAC some additional information so we can make some further recommendations in regards to these meters. Road work, there's also a 10-year plan, so we expect to spend almost $1.2 million on roads. And over the course of this 9-year period, they're slated to spend upwards of $19 million.
So, Mickey, back on, just up a little bit, on the $400,000 for emergency mediation for the sewer system. What was that again?
Contingency fund.
Yeah, I don't think there's a specific item that they're anticipating, but given histories and anticipations, they knew that there likely is going to have some type of event that will happen in the year.
All right.
So that's what that is. You're right, it's probably a contingency would probably be a better description there.
Mickey, with regard to your water and sewer reserve, the page 45 where you show the financials, the capital maintenance lines are short, both for water and sewer, because it didn't pick up the meters for the water. So that 450,000 is not in your calculation of what happens to your reserve. And the holding tank of $1 million for the sewer is not included in that page either. So when you go back and take a look at your documents, page 45, that shows the water and sewer and new utilities page, your capital maintenance are missing those two items.
Okay. The $1 million is treated as strategic, and so it wouldn't be reflected on the sewer and water.
But it does impact your water and sewer reserve.
It will, and how we slice and dice it on this schedule, you're right, we need to look at that one.
Mickey? Just real quick on a couple items. Clayton, do we have a preventive maintenance program going on throughout Public Works for all of our equipment and that kind of thing? All right. And then the other thing, just in the thought, when we talk about parking expansions, I know that at times we're jammed a lot of places, but my thought is if that takes place 5% of the time, is that something we want to put up in the front as far as expansion, so that if, 95% of the time it's fine, but 5% it's not, like, early voting, for an example, that only happens a couple days a year. So do we plan based on that, or do we think overall we're good most of the time? Maybe that's something we could relook at or pare down a little bit.
Sure.
My name is Robert Johnson. My question is pertaining to the $4.8 million that's proposed for the Tenasseee clubhouse replacement. Does any of that money include the cost of providing more parking spaces or not? No.
Nope, that's what you got is what you get.
So that's just a direct replacement. The parking lot is considered as is now,
Yeah, because the insurance would cover just replacing the structure.
just the structure.
Yes.
Yeah, good point, Robert, because what then happens if you want more, you don't want the inconvenience of parking in fire lanes and on the grass. If you want more restaurant space, you want which it was required to have a bigger kitchen to serve the existing chairs and tables, it's going to cost you more. So that's what we need to be keeping in mind. It is going to cost more to correct the problems that we had at Tenasseee that were given to us by the original developer.
And this may be more of a question of strategic importance. Has this board or in the past ever considered transferring some of the roads, water and sewer back to the counties?
Yeah. Yeah, the county does not want our roads. They don't meet the county standards from a width standpoint.
Yeah, I understand that, but are any of the roads none of the roads meet the county standards?
No.
Wow.
Well, Chota Road does, I
Well,
believe.
wait a second. No, that's not exactly. If you go back into the original agreement, CCI, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, part of their deal with the county and TRDA and TVA was that this would be a community where they would take care of the roads. And
Yeah.
it was never
The roads were designated private.
private roads, exactly.
Yeah.
From the beginning. And
Yeah, I
the
saw that
county
in
is
the docs.
exactly right to say that you're a private community, and in the beginning,
Yep.
you designated them as private. But now, 35 years later, here we are contributing $12 million in property tax a year, $750,000 to that $1 per square foot education tax. So you're looking at almost $13 million a year going to the county, and they're wanting to And bless their hearts for doing it, because they're in the right. Live within the original agreement.
There's also gas tax that are not included.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Quick parking observation, and maybe this is just me, but when I go to Tenasseee, when I did go to Tenasseee, I'd pull in the parking lot, and it's like there's 2 empty spots. I walk in the restaurant, it's half empty, or 90% empty. Most of the parking, my opinion, is golfers. So you can expand a restaurant, have more tables, and probably have zero impact on the parking. It's golfers that are taking the parking spots. Okay.
80% of the total parking.
Yeah.
Studies been done. You can get rid of the restaurant, now it's a bar.
Yeah.
Or you can get rid of it all, now it's a restaurant.
Yep.
Or you can do both, and if you fix it, it's gonna cost you more money.
Understand.
Or, with my plan to phase in, you have enough parking for that type of a situation already, so you don't have to expand parking either. Phase 2, down the road, when we have the money, when we're past our crisis that we're all talking about, why we have to do all this, then we can plan it in, and maybe we'll find we don't need 3 full-time, full-service restaurants. Possibility, even though I love Tenasseee and I'd have to give it up, maybe we don't need all 3.
That's all of the capital that was listed there. We'll make some qualifications and try to slice that into some additional categories, either amenities, and we'll get with you and try to figure out how the best way to do that. Yeah, yeah.
So, we also mentioned when, we're going to relook at the dock expansion, so potentially put that in the budget for this year. And we'd also mentioned that, if the Tenasseee driving range had a payback, that could potentially be considered as well. So we probably need to look at that as well. If not, then certainly defer.
Yeah, I would just say, Marty, on both of these, I think the dock's easier math to do just because it's very finite. The driving range, I'd say we should have a business case before we make that consideration. Because that's, we know the docks because we've seen 3 of them go in the last 2 years. That one's pretty easy to run the math on and say, we know what we have coming at us. But the driving range, I don't think we're going to be ready by the FAC Friday.
Okay, and that's fine.
And everything else they're doing.
I thought,
to have that
I
done,
thought
so.
Chris had alluded to a payback on it, so.
Okay, let's just, we've never seen it, so.
So bring it to the Finance Committee, Chris, if you want to have it considered.
Yeah. But certainly, I think the docks, we've done 3 of those in the last 3 years, so there's a pretty good handle on what those look like.
2 and 3 years.
Excuse me, 2 and 3 years,
2 and
thank
3
you.
years, yeah.
This is the 3rd.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Mickey? Any closing comments, Chet? Not to put you on the spot, but just asking.
Currently, we're reviewing with the insurance company, and that's kind of a dogfight, but that is what it is. And as I've tried to explain to the staff and everybody else, the insurance company's entire efforts will be not to pay us. So we have to try and find ways around that and ways to convince them of what it is we do. Now, to be fair to them, they are keeping up with our loss of income, loss of the area and that sort of thing. So we are getting monies from them. It's not like they aren't paying anything, and they've already. Yeah, business interruption is the correct term. So that's moving ahead. We're waiting on getting the insurance before we start taking any other steps, because one of those criteria is whether we keep the foundation that is currently there or we remove it, and whether they're going to pay for that one way or the other. And I mean, I find that as just a box we got to check one way or the other, and before we can move on.
So we have a structural engineer.
Yes, we have a structural engineer who's reviewed that. He's given his opinion. Steve and, not Steve, I've lost his mind. No, Winston and our attorney, Kevin, thanks. Woo, wow. Kevin and Winston are sitting down with the insurance, and they've reviewed that, and Kevin has our engineer's report going forward with that. I mean, and in truth, whichever way this goes, we just need to put the insurance part of this to bed. If we have to keep part of that foundation, then we have to keep part of that foundation, and we engineer around it, or we make the decision we're going to incur the cost to dig it out. Doesn't matter. So that's just a matter of getting through that insurance process to bring it to a close so that we can move forward with all the other decisions that need to be made.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, just give you an opportunity if there's anything you wanted to
Oh, yeah,
close
no,
with.
and I appreciate that. And I think, I think that this year's process in doing all this budgeting and what I've put the staff through and what the staff has put each other through has been a great process. And we still have other things to do that we can be better prepared for next year. And next year will be probably in addition to what you've seen this year, because we're learning more and more. This is probably an anecdotal comment, but I think it is important that you have my commitment on it, and that is next year, if Pat has the ability to say, well, I don't really know what costs go into that, then I'm in trouble. So we need to take each department apart and know exactly what costs are built into that department. Not just what they spend money on specific, but what are the costs, the power, the roads, the fuel, the vehicles, and how much it costs to maintain that guy who's sitting over there doing nothing but taking care of those trucks. Whatever that is, I'm using these all as examples, but in every department, I need to be able to report to you, these are the real costs. At the end of the day, this is all the nickels and dimes that went in to making this department function. And there should never be a question about, well, there's this other thing that we didn't calculate in. If that's the case, I've failed. So between now and next budget season, that's going to be a task that I have to attack, and be sure that when we tell you these are the costs, we know all the details of what that cost is. That includes docks, Pat.
All right, thanks, Chet. Brad, next steps from the FAC?
So we will take, and I'll meet with Mickey right after this, we'll split that capital into existing as well as new. I think that's a great suggestion. That way it'll be much clearer in the presentation next Wednesday. We'll look at docks as part of a consideration to add back in the FAC. In our normal meeting on Friday, we'll make the formal recommendation on where we think we should be for the budget presentation on next Wednesday. And then you guys will have the opportunity to vote on that next week. So,
okay.
Thank you to the team, and I know they've all worked long hours and battled the flu and a few other things in the middle of that. So thank you for pulling all that stuff together. Appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments from anybody? Don?
It's the one on the right.
Okay, good. Thank you. 3-4 days ago, I had a very, very long conversation with a couple that had contacted me and said that they were voting for me. And they had some things they were struggling with. He's 84 years old, she's 82. through a mistake that they made, along with some others several years ago. As best as I understand it, they got fleeced by a Ponzi scheme and lost 75% of their retirement. That $6.30 for them is kind of a big number. Because just to be able to go out and have an inexpensive dinner out, it will take them a couple of months to set money aside to be able to do that. I would find it difficult to believe that this board of directors and all the ancillary people that have been involved have no compassionate bone in their body. Just don't believe that. For your consideration, situations like this couple, and I don't know how many more there are in the village, would you be willing to fix their 5% permanently? The numbers that are involved is not going to make or break the budget one way or the other. But it would be, I think, a really very, very good public relations, if nothing else. Okay? So I'm putting that out there for your consideration.
Yeah,
Not
Don,
just for this couple, but I know that there are others.
Don, yeah, there are others. There's, single people who have lost income because their spouse has passed, and as a result of pension and Social Security went away. However, that would require a change to the CNRs because we are not allowed to discriminate in assessments between property owners. That would require a change to the CNRs.
Can the board make that change?
No. 2/3 of the property owners have to vote to make a change.
Okay. Is it worth putting out there?
And by the way, the last time we did it, which, by the way, it's only happened one time, took 3 months, cost $90,000 to do it.
Okay.
Sorry.
And again-
I, by the way, have a lot of empathy for those people, and in fact, I will weigh that empathy when I make my vote on what the assessment will be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that empathy, and I don't doubt everybody on the board and everybody in the room, probably the entire village, has compassionate bones in their bodies. But I'll be the cold-hearted guy that says the village finances are not based on my personal finances. If it costs $1 million a year to run this place and I can't afford to donate enough to that $1 million a year, as hard as it'll be for me to swallow, this won't be the place that I can stay. And that's just the cold, hard truth.
Okay, on that happy note, I think we're done for today. And certainly, if anybody has any questions or comments before the vote next Wednesday, certainly feel free to submit them. Thank you.